For years, fans could only guess what really happened, until Benny Andersson finally spilled the truth behind ABBA's breakup. He and Frida were once the ultimate power couple, adored by millions, but behind closed doors, things weren't quite as perfect. In a rare interview, Benny finally reveals what led to their split. Was it the pressure of fame? What was the final straw? Stick around as we uncover the real story. Back in the 1970s, when ABBA was ruling the pop music scene, Benny Andersson and Frida Lyngstad seemed like a match made in heaven. Their love story played out in front of the world, just like their bandmates Björn and Agnetha. But beneath the glittery outfits and chart-topping hits, things weren't as flawless as they appeared. Cracks were forming, and eventually they became too big to ignore. Benny and Frida's story began in 1969, before ABBA was even a thing. At the time, Frida was making waves in Sweden's folk music scene, while Benny was already famous as part of the Hep Stars, Sweden's answer to the Beatles. He first spotted her at a music festival, and something about her instantly caught his eye. Her fiery red hair, her powerhouse voice, her undeniable presence. The spark between them was electric. ABBA fans had always dreamed of a reunion, and after 35 long years, it finally happened. But back in the day, Benny and Frida weren't just bandmates, they were two dreamers chasing the same big goal. In 1975, Frida told a Swedish magazine that meeting Benny just felt right. He understood her love for music in a way no one else ever had. For Benny, it wasn't just about her talent. There was something different about Frida. Her independence, her raw energy, she was unlike anyone he had worked with before. As ABBA took shape, so did Benny and Frida's relationship. While Björn and Agnetha were more in the public eye as a couple, Benny and Frida focused on perfecting the music. Benny had a gift for crafting unforgettable melodies, and Frida had a way of pouring every ounce of emotion into her performances. Together, they helped define the legendary ABBA sound. But fame came with a price. By the mid-1970s, as ABBA's success skyrocketed, the pressure started to wear them down. Benny, ever the perfectionist, spent endless hours in the studio fine-tuning every detail of their songs. Frida, more spontaneous and led by emotion, sometimes struggled with his meticulous approach. The same differences that once made them a great team slowly began driving them apart. But it wasn't just the music that created tension. Fame itself became an issue. Benny liked to keep a low profile when he wasn't on stage, while Frida embraced the social side of being a celebrity. Their friends started noticing the strain, especially during ABBA's world tours. Even their creative spark, the thing that had once brought them together, started to dim. By 1979, the writing was on the wall. The cracks in their relationship had grown too deep to ignore. Benny threw himself into his work, spending long nights in the studio, while whispers began to spread about his growing closeness with Mona Nurklet, a television worker he had met during an ABBA TV special. Then, in early 1981, everything collapsed. One day, Benny came home and admitted to Frida that he had feelings for Mona. The confession hit like a ton of bricks. They tried to keep things professional for ABBA, but the heartbreak was impossible to hide. After nearly a decade together, their love story came to an end. In an emotional interview with Expressen, Benny's hands trembled as he tried to explain what went wrong. "Do we have to use that song? It was in the last film. Couldn't we pick this one instead?" he recalled. Though he insisted they were still friends, those who knew them well could see the pain beneath his words. For Frida, it wasn't just about losing a partner. It felt like the end of everything they had built together, both in love and in music. The breakup left a lasting mark on ABBA that couldn't be ignored. They continued making music, but something had shifted. The spark that once defined them wasn't the same. Both couples that had been at the heart of the band were now broken, and their songs began to reflect that pain. Tracks like The Winner Takes It All and When All Is Said and Done suddenly carried a deeper, more personal meaning for those who knew the story behind the scenes. While the world saw ABBA's golden couple falling apart, few truly understood the heartbreak they were enduring. So, when reporter Lars Johansson walked into the Expressen office that May morning in 1981, he had no idea he was about to uncover a story that would forever change the way fans saw the band. Inside a small office at Sweden's Expressen newspaper on May 20, 1981, Benny Andersson sat at a desk, nervously fidgeting with a pack of cigarettes. The usual confidence he carried on stage was nowhere to be seen. His hands shook, his eyes were weary, and the weight of the last few weeks seemed to press down on him. For some time, he had dodged questions, but there was no avoiding them now. The man who had once commanded audiences with ease now sat anxiously, bracing himself for a conversation he had been dreading. He admitted he had no idea how others handled moments like this. His voice was barely more than a whisper, every word thick with hesitation. Smoke curled around him, as if trying to shield him from the reality he was finally speaking aloud. The same man who had effortlessly composed some of ABBA's most unforgettable songs now found himself at a loss for words when it came to his own heartbreak. The newsroom buzzed with anticipation. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was the first real glimpse into the unraveling of ABBA's most famous couple. For weeks, fans had speculated and tabloids had spread rumors. But now, Benny was finally breaking his silence. As he spoke, every word carried the weight of a love story that had unraveled faster than anyone had expected. Across the desk, the reporter listened closely, too caught up in the moment to notice his coffee growing cold. When the conversation shifted to Mona, Benny tried to brush it off with a casual tone, but it didn't quite land. He called her his new woman, attempting a laugh that sounded anything but natural. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as the reality of his confession sank in. No matter how hard he tried to downplay it, the tension behind his forced smile was impossible to ignore. As soon as Benny began talking about the future of ABBA, the atmosphere suddenly changed. For a fleeting instant, he shed his normally polished appearance and conversed in an open and forthright manner. It was with a tired chuckle that he quipped that he couldn't envision himself still dancing on stage with a beer belly at the age of 45. He conceded that they were not flawless and that celebrity has its drawbacks. Frida went down for her own interview during the same week, and she carried herself with the calm strength that had always been characteristic of her overall personality. Her words were graceful, and she did not dwell on her feelings of resentment or remorse. "It's true that I'm quite excited. As you are aware, it would be a lovely experience to get together with the fans once more, as this is something that does not occur very frequently," she stated. She stated that although the split had been difficult, she had found solace in someone new, a Swedish businessman whose name she preferred to keep confidential. She chose not to dwell on the past, and instead admitted that she had learned from the experience. Her remarks included a fine balance of resiliency and vulnerability, which was fascinating to observe. Her perception of marriage had shifted, and she no longer considered it a necessity. Still, love was important. It was still something that was worth clinging to, regardless of the form it took. The story that was published in Expressen had a significant impact on ABBA. It revealed that even the most famous celebrities are not immune to experiencing heartbreak, thereby removing the glossy, picture-perfect image that had been presented. The band continued to create music for an additional year and a half, but by that time, circumstances had shifted. It was the spark that formerly distinguished them that now carried an undercurrent of melancholy, which was something that even their most joyful songs were unable to completely conceal. Behind the sparkling brilliance of ABBA was a narrative that very few people had heard, a story that had formed one of the group's most prominent stars. Over the course of her career, how did a little girl who was once considered an outcast in her own nation become one of the most beloved voices in pop music? The last few months of 1945 marked the beginning of a war child's journey to become a pop princess. At the same time, when people all around the world were celebrating the end of World War II, a newborn girl was born in a tiny town in Norway. In the years that followed, the world would simply refer to her as Frida, even though her given name was Annie Frid Lyngstad. Her arrival was met with a sense of gloom, rather than the enthusiasm that would have been expected. The fact that she was born to a Norwegian mother and a German soldier in a country that was still recovering from the effects of war made her more than just another child. She was a war baby. Even before she could take her first steps, she was already considered an outsider due to her family's history. A German soldier stationed in Norway named Alfred Haas had captured the heart of Frida's mother, Sinni Lyngstad, who had fallen in love with him. What started out as a romantic relationship quickly turned into a burdensome obligation. Upon the conclusion of the war, the nation was in a state of desperate need to rebuild, and everyone who was associated with the enemy faced severe retaliation. During World War II, Norwegian women who had romantic ties with German soldiers were discriminated against, stigmatized as traitors, and treated with open hostility. However, the weight of that animosity was carried by their children, who were innocent but undesired. In the years following the war, life in Norway was anything but simple for Frida and her mother. Frida was raised with the misconception that her father had been killed in the war when she was a young girl. However, The reality was a great deal more difficult. That was the fiction that her family told her as a means of diverting her attention away from the reality that was significantly more convoluted. A decision that was extremely difficult to make was made by her mother, Cindy, in the hope of escaping the suffering and stigma. Leaving Norway behind, she brought Frida with her and departed with nothing but the faith that her life would improve. Following their journey across the border into Sweden, the two eventually made their home in the quaint industrial town of Torshälla. Even though life was difficult, Cindy was resolute in her goal to provide her daughter with a future that was unencumbered by the shadows of her past. Her days were spent stitching clothing, and her nights were spent snuggling Frida into bed. She was a seamstress through and through, and she worked hard. Despite the fact that she was completely worn out, she did everything in her ability to ensure that her daughter had a sense of being cherished and protected. When Frida was younger, music was more than simply a hobby. It was also a means of escape. Singing provided her with a space where she could feel like she belonged in a world where she frequently sensed that she did not belong. Her voice carried a depth and intensity that was way above her years, and by the time she was 11 years old, she was already performing on little stages at local festivals. The citizens of the community took notice of her talent, but her grandma was the one who was most proud of her. While Cindy put in long hours to provide for them, Frida's grandma was the one who encouraged her passion for music and helped her develop it. In spite of the few resources she possessed, she managed to amass sufficient funds to purchase Frida, her very first record player, in addition to many vinyl recordings that she held dear. At each and every turn of the wheel, Frida was whisked away to a different location, one that was significantly larger than the tranquil streets of Torshälla. When Frida reflected on those early days, she stated that music was her sanctuary in an interview that she gave to a Swedish radio station in 1975. When she sang, everything else seemed to disappear. Nothing mattered on stage, not even where she came from or the whispers that sometimes trailed her. No one really cared about either of those things. When it came to a young lady who had spent her entire life feeling like an outsider, being in the spotlight involved more than simply being seen. It meant finally being accepted. When Frida was 13 years old, she was not merely daydreaming about a career in music. Rather, she was actively pursuing it. By the time she was a teenager, she had already created her first band, which was called the Annie Frid Four, and she was performing wherever she could. By the time she was 16 years old, she was performing jazz songs in front of packed dance halls while touring Sweden with a large band. It didn't take long before industry executives began paying notice to her because of her distinctively deep and soulful voice, which made her stand out. Her debut song was released by EMI Records in 1967, which was the year that she was given the opportunity to take her first significant stride into the spotlight. This was the beginning of something that was much more significant than she could have ever anticipated. By the time the early 1970s arrived, ABBA was just beginning to take shape, and an unexpected revelation completely altered the course of events. Frida had spent her entire life under the impression that her father, Alfred Haas, had passed away. However, a German magazine had managed to locate him. However, he was not. He was still alive and residing in Germany at the time. Suddenly, she was confronted with the potential of becoming acquainted with the individual whom she had been informed did not exist. 1977 was the year that a reunion was planned, but it was hardly the dramatic storybook event that one might anticipate attending. On the contrary, it was characterized by extended periods of awkward silence, nervous stares, and a stream of queries that did not have straightforward responses. Frida was left dealing with feelings that she was unsure how to go about processing after their initial encounter. After some time had passed, she would recall how the experience felt more like two strangers trying to reconnect after 30 years of separation than it did like a long-lost father and daughter embracing the past. Even though they made every effort to close the emotional gap that existed between them, it was impossible for any number of words to bring them closer together. She had spent years wondering about the man who was now sitting across from her, but he continued to feel like a mystery to her because of his presence. Frida's real-life narrative was not simply one of chart-topping success. Rather, it was a very personal journey of looking for a father that she had never actually known. Even while she had already been taken aback by the revelation of her roots, she would later discover that her birth was connected to a much more extensive and sinister event in history. The Nazi Lebensborn program, which was intended to generate offspring of supposedly pure Germanic descent, had been behind her birth. She had been born as part of this effort. Despite the fact that she had been considered an outcast in her own country in the past, she had become one of the most recognizable voices in the world as a result of her identity. From a youth marked by rejection to her rise to fame as a pop phenomenon on a global scale, Frida had triumphed over a significant portion of her history. But despite all of her accomplishments, fate continued to startle her in unexpected ways. And even after she gave up her status as a pop star in exchange for a real royal title, the question that remained was whether or not she had at last discovered the bliss that she had been looking for all along. In the aftermath of the dissolution of the band ABBA and the dissolution of her marriage to Benny Andersson, it appeared as though Frida was going to enter a real-life magical world. As soon as she tied the knot with Prince Heinrich Royce von Plauen in 1992, she was elevated to the status of princess. It was a veritable feast for the Swedish press. Their much-loved ABBA diva, who had captivated audiences all over the world with her beautiful stage ensembles, was now residing in a castle in Switzerland, which overlooked the breathtaking grandeur of Lake Geneva. Indeed, it appeared to be the ideal conclusion to a storybook. However, within the confines of the palace, life was not quite as spectacular as it appeared in the headlines. There was a time when the free-spirited woman who had previously dominated the stage with her electrifying performances found herself constrained by the rigorous world of royal etiquette. Each and every appearance, each and every phrase, and each and every action had to be in accordance with centuries-old customs that she found to be entirely foreign. Suddenly, the artistic freedom that she had previously taken for granted was replaced with an intense demand to conform, and she found herself questioning whether or not this was the life that she had envisioned for herself. As part of a rare interview that took place in 1993 with a Swiss newspaper, Frida stated that adjusting to the lifestyle of an aristocracy was significantly more challenging than she had anticipated. Those carefree days of freely expressing oneself through music are long gone. Her world, on the other hand, was now replete with formal dinners, big ceremonies, and an inexhaustible supply of social duties. The royal circle of Prince Heinrich was completely different from the entertainment industry that Frida had been familiar with. Charity galas and diplomatic events took the place of the recording studios and music venues where she had flourished in the past. There were certain expectations that came with Heinrich's society, and those expectations did not leave much room for the kind of creative expression that Frida had formerly lived for. Heinrich was revered among European nobles, but his world came with certain demands. She discovered that she was having a difficult time distinguishing between her new role and the artist that she had always been. On the other hand, nobody could have adequately prepared her for what was to come. Frida's world was turned upside down in the year 1998 when her daughter, Anne-Lisa Lotta, was unfortunate enough to be killed in a vehicle accident in the state of New York. She was barely 30 years old. Anne was more than just her child. She was her closest confidant and the person who had always been there for her, through the highs and lows of her incredible life throughout her entire existence. The loss of her was an unfathomable anguish, and it was a pain that could not be alleviated by any amount of royal status or previous achievements. Anne had been present for every stage of her mother's incredible life, from the period when she was a child during the war to the time when she became a worldwide music sensation and finally, when she became a real-life princess. Since the beginning, their connection had been profound, unbreakable, and founded on years of mutual comprehension. This is what made her loss much more heartbreaking than it already was. Frida was left with a loss that was so profound that no amount of fame, riches, or royal titles could ever come near to relieving the pain that she felt during the time when Anne was taken away from her mother. The burden of it was quite heavy. In a manner that few people could fathom, Frida was crushed by the loss. Her withdrawal from the world, her withdrawal from the spotlight, and her spending the majority of her time in the quiet of her Swiss home were all signs of her retreat. The glittering existence that she had once led, whether it was performing on stage or attending royal occasions, seemed far away and completely devoid of any significance to her whatsoever. The agonizing pain that she carried with her every day made even the royal obligations that had once required her attention seem insignificant in comparison to what she was going through. Frida discovered comfort in an unanticipated source, Benny Andersson. While she was going through this extremely distressing time, Benny made an effort to communicate with her, despite the fact that they had been emotionally distant for many years and had a difficult history. In comparison to the majority of people, He had a deeper comprehension of the specific pressures that came with popularity, as well as the loneliness that may persist underlying it all. Their shared history with ABBA provided Frida with a connection that she urgently needed, something that seemed real in a world that had suddenly become so empty. Although it was not a spectacular gesture or a reunion that resurrected their past, it did provide Frida with a connection that she sorely needed. Frida had mostly disappeared from the public eye by the time the year 2000 rolled around. In a world that had previously cheered her every action, she had diminished to the point that she was rarely seen. The individual who had previously been subjected to rejection during the war, who had triumphed in the music industry and who had married into royalty, had discovered tranquility in her private life. At times, she would make an appearance at events that were associated with ABBA. Nevertheless, for the most part, she opted to remain in the peace and quiet of her Swiss retreat rather than face the scrutiny of the cameras and the expectations of the greater world. Despite the fact that Frida left the band, ABBA's legacy has never been diminished. If anything, it continued to become more powerful, which demonstrated that their influence on music was not even close to being over. Imagine having the opportunity to experience the enchantment of ABBA in a manner that you never believed was possible. One in which music, technology, and nostalgia come together to form something completely new. To put it another way, this is precisely what occurred when ABBA revolutionized the concert experience in a way that had never been seen before. It would be an understatement to say that ABBA's journey has been iconic. They continued to be an unstoppable force throughout their entire career, from their meteoric rise to fame in the 1970s to their decades-long impact on popular culture. In spite of the fact that they formally parted ways in 1982, their music never seemed to stop. Their timeless hits continued to connect with new generations, ensuring that their spirit would continue to live on long after they had removed themselves from the stage. However, in the year 2021, ABBA took a step that nobody had anticipated. Following a sabbatical of 40 years, they came out with an album called Voyage, which immediately rekindled the affection of millions of loyal followers all over the world. It was not just a journey down memory lane. Rather, it was a reminder of the reasons why ABBA's sound is still as powerful as it always was. One thing that made the comeback of ABBA even more remarkable was not the song itself. Rather, it was the manner in which they chose to showcase it. They announced ABBA Voyage, a unique residency in London that used digital avatars, popularly referred to as ABBAtars, performing alongside a real band. This was to replace the usual reunion tour that they had previously announced. The technology that was used in the event was really incredible. Computer versions of Benny, Bjorn, Agnetha, and Frida were created after 7 years of development and an eye-popping cost of $175 million. These computer counterparts looked, moved, and performed just like their younger selves, while also resembling their younger selves. Over the course of several weeks, the band wore motion capture suits in order to guarantee that every single movement, expression, and ounce of energy was caught in an impeccable manner. What is the end result? An innovative concert experience that had never been seen before, blurring the barriers between reality and technology in a way that had never been seen before. It was in May of 2022 when ABBA Voyage first opened its doors, and it became an instant phenomenon. Fans from over 140 nations traveled from all over the world to attend this next chapter in ABBA's history, which resulted in the sale of more than 1.3 million tickets. The experience of going to the event was an emotional trip for many people. Not only was it about listening to the music, but it was also about reliving memories, going back to the past, and honoring the eternal enchantment that ABBA has created forever. During the first anniversary of the show, which took place in 2023, the band even made a surprise appearance, waving to the euphoric audience while their avatars performed on stage. At that moment, ABBA stood in the same room as their younger digital selves, bringing together their past and present in a way that left their fans unable to find the words to express their feelings. A specially constructed stadium was used for the ABBA Voyage concert, which was held in London close to Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park. This arena was created to improve every aspect of the performance during the show. The performance was infused with warmth and intensity, thanks to a live band consisting of 10 members, and cutting-edge visual effects made certain that the avatars did not only imitate performances, rather they lived experiences. Every single member in the audience was able to take away something that was truly one of a kind from the event, which was a breathtaking combination of nostalgia and creativity. The show's capacity to adapt to different situations was what made it even more remarkable. Every performance was impacted by the intensity of the audience, which resulted in each night having a distinct atmosphere compared to the previous one. The performance provided a venue in which fans of all ages could come together and celebrate one of the most significant legacies in the history of pop music. This was true regardless of whether the fans had been following ABBA from the very beginning or were only discovering their music for the third time. In spite of the enormous success that ABBA Voyage has had, the band has made it quite plain that they have no intention of ever again performing live in the conventional sense. The fact of the matter is that they notoriously declined an offer of $1 billion for a trip around the world. The ABBA Voyage Arena will continue to be the only place where the avatars can be seen, which will ensure that the event is a really unique experience. Even if it is possible that ABBA fans will never see them play on stage again, the band has discovered a way to push the limits of live entertainment in a way that no other artist has ever done before. An intriguing question arises as a result of this. How did Benny and Frida's relationship change as a result of their fame? If they had done anything differently, would it have been possible to keep the love that they had once shared? Also, and this is of the utmost importance, would it have been possible to preserve the original magic of ABBA, or was it always intended for their path to unfold exactly as it did?